The boy had always been different from other children. While most kids ran and played, he loved sitting quietly, watching the stars through the small window of his space station. The station was tiny, almost fragile-looking, floating far away from any planet, surrounded by the endless black of space. It creaked sometimes, a soft reminder that it was alive in its own way, and the boy often imagined it as a giant spaceship animal that had grown fond of him. One evening, as he looked out at the galaxy, he noticed something strange. Shadows moved in the distance, shapes that were too big and too fast to be ordinary space debris. His heart raced, but not in fear, more like excitement. He had read about creatures that lived in the void, creatures so enormous and rare that no human had ever seen them closely. He had never imagined meeting them like this, in his own little corner of the universe. The first dragon appeared suddenly, a massive silhouette cutting through the starlight. Its scales glowed faintly, like molten metal, reflecting colors the boy had never seen before. Its eyes were enormous, sharp, and glimmering like twin suns. The boy felt a shiver run down his spine. Most people would have screamed or run, but he didn't. He just watched, fascinated. The dragon hovered closer, wings folding gracefully in a way that made the boy think of mountains in flight. Then another came, and another. Soon he was surrounded. Each dragon was bigger than the station itself, and their sheer presence made the metal walls vibrate. The air seemed thicker, charged with a quiet energy that hummed in his chest. The dragons stared at him, and he stared back, feeling a strange sense of calm in the middle of what should have been a terrifying moment. He could feel their curiosity. It was not just a simple hunger for prey or instinct to attack. It was something different. They seemed confused, puzzled even, by this small human who didn't tremble or flee. The boy tilted his head and smiled faintly. "Hello," he said softly, though he wasn't sure they could hear him. I'm not dangerous." The dragons made low growling sounds, not exactly a roar, more like a question. They circled him slowly, their massive wings creating gusts that pushed against the walls of the station. Tiny objects rattled, and the boy ducked instinctively, but he didn't step away. He had learned long ago that fear only made encounters worse. Curiosity, he thought. Curiosity was always stronger than fear. One of the dragons moved closer, tilting its head, its glowing eyes locked on his face. The boy noticed patterns on its scales, like ancient symbols, swirling faintly as if they told a story. He had always loved stories, especially bedtime stories. They were simple, warm, and filled with imagination. He wondered if maybe, just maybe, the dragons liked stories too. He took a deep breath. "Do you want a story?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper, not because he was scared, but because he didn't want to startle them. The dragons froze, as if the question itself had caught them off guard. One of the smaller dragons blinked, its body rippling with color. The boy smiled wider. He had no idea if they understood him, but somehow he felt a connection. The boy slowly sat down on the floor of the station, folding his legs in front of him. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice calm and steady, "there was a small child who lived far away in a place no one could see. He was alone, but he loved watching the stars. He wondered what creatures might live out there in the darkness, and he dreamed of meeting them someday." The dragons didn't move. They simply hovered, their eyes fixed on him, their massive heads tilting as though listening. The boy continued, telling the story of a brave little human who didn't fight monsters, but instead tried to understand them. He described how the child spoke to creatures that others ran from, how he learned their ways, and how he discovered that even the most fearsome beings could be kind if treated with patience and respect. As he spoke, something remarkable happened. The dragon's sharp expressions softened slightly. Their bodies, which had radiated power and danger, seemed less threatening. A subtle warmth filled the room, like sunlight spilling into a dark cave. The boy noticed it and smiled. He had never expected to calm dragons with words alone, yet here he was, surrounded by some of the most dangerous creatures in the universe, and they weren't attacking. They were listening. The boy paused, letting the silence linger for a moment. He could hear the faint hum of the station, the subtle vibration of wings in the vacuum of space, and the rhythmic breathing of dragons nearby. It was a sound he would never forget, a sound that felt alive, almost like music. Then he continued, his voice gentle, weaving another story. This one about friendship and courage, about discovering the unknown without fear, and about the simple magic of kindness. Time seemed to stretch. Hours passed, though the boy barely noticed. He told story after story, sometimes pausing to watch the dragon's reactions. One of them leaned closer, a little flame flickering harmlessly from its mouth, as if in awe. Another twitched its tail, shimmering in patterns that looked almost like applause. The boy realized that he was doing something extraordinary. He was communicating with beings no one had ever understood. And he was doing it not with weapons or tricks, but with stories. Finally, as the first faint glow of a distant star passed across the station's window, the boy felt his eyes grow heavy. The dragons, still hovering, seemed quieter now, their curiosity satisfied for the moment. He yawned softly and whispered, "I'll tell you more tomorrow. But now it's time to rest." He lay down on the cold floor, feeling strangely safe despite being surrounded by enormous dragons. The dragons shifted, creating a protective circle around him. Their glowing eyes dimmed slightly, as if they understood the boy's need for sleep. For the first time in the boy's life, he didn't feel alone. He was alone in the universe in the usual sense, but not in the way that mattered. Here, surrounded by creatures that could have been his enemies, he had found companionship. And so, the boy drifted into sleep, the dragons keeping watch. Outside the station, the stars blinked silently, unaware of the remarkable bond that had formed in the darkness of space. A boy and dragons, enemies by nature, yet friends by choice, shared a moment that would change both their worlds forever. The night passed quietly. The boy's dreams were filled with stars and dragons, with laughter and the soft murmur of stories. And the dragons, for the first time in their long lives, experienced something new and understanding of a small, brave human who had faced them not with fear, but with words and imagination. When morning came, the boy would wake to a new day filled with endless possibilities. The dragons would still be there, waiting not as hunters, but as companions. And the boy knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would turn the galaxy upside down, one story at a time. The boy woke to a quiet hum, the kind that vibrated gently in his chest, a sound that was both strange and comforting. The dragons were still there, their immense forms hovering near the station's walls, wings folded, eyes soft and watchful. The morning light from a distant star barely reached the station, painting everything in muted golds and silvers. It felt calm, almost like a gentle promise of safety. Though the dragons were powerful enough to destroy the station in an instant, the boy stretched slowly, rubbing his eyes. He could feel the weight of last night's events pressing on him, the fear, the excitement, the wonder. He had faced creatures that every human story had painted as deadly monsters, and yet here he was, unharmed. Not only unharmed, but surrounded by dragons that seemed curious, almost thoughtful. He remembered the stories he had told the night before. Tales of courage, friendship, and kindness had filled the room like invisible threads, wrapping around the dragons in ways he could only feel. It had been incredible, almost unbelievable. And yet it had worked. Somehow, words and imagination had tamed creatures that no human had ever spoken to. The dragons made soft rumbling noises, almost like low purrs, and the boy realized they were moving closer, investigating the small human who dared to sit among giants without fear. One of them tilted its enormous head, its glowing eyes following every small movement he made. Another extended a claw, then retracted it slowly, as if unsure of what to do. The boy smiled faintly. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I won't hurt you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The dragons, in all their terrifying glory, seemed suspended between curiosity and caution. The boy felt his pulse slow. He had learned long ago that silence could be as powerful as words. It allowed understanding to grow, and he sensed that the dragons were beginning to understand something about him, that he was not like the humans they had perhaps imagined before. Finally, the boy stood up. "I think you like stories," he said softly, almost to himself. The dragons shifted, their massive bodies moving with surprising grace in the confined space. One of them emitted a soft, almost musical sound. It was not threatening, not angry. It felt like a response. The boy smiled wider. Maybe, he thought, just maybe, they did understand him. He sat back down, legs crossed, and took a deep breath. "I'll tell you another story," he said, voice steady, calm. He imagined the dragons leaning in, listening as they had last night. He started slowly, choosing words carefully. Once, in a place far away, there lived a small creature who everyone thought was weak. But this creature had a gift to see the good in everyone, even those who seemed scary or dangerous. One day, the creature met beings so powerful that others ran away in fear. But the small creature saw something else, a chance to learn, to understand, to make friends. As he spoke, the dragons leaned closer. One of them lowered its enormous head, letting the boy's words wash over it. Its eyes, bright and sharp, soft in a way that made the boy's chest swell with hope. He realized something incredible. These creatures, as fierce as they were, responded to stories because stories carried more than words. They carried emotion, imagination, and a sense of connection. The boy continued, telling tales of adventure and discovery. He spoke of distant planets with crystal rivers and forests that floated in the air. He described creatures of every shape and size, some terrifying, some gentle, and how understanding and kindness could make even the most dangerous beings into friends. The dragons listened, shifting slightly as if to get a better view of the boy, their massive forms folding in ways that made them seem almost graceful. At one point, a small dragon leaned so close that the boy could see the tiny sparks flickering along its scales. It was mesmerizing, like watching living light dance across metal. The boy didn't flinch. He reached out a hand slowly, and the dragon's eye followed it, glowing brighter, curious but not threatening. For a moment, their gaze met, and the boy felt a strange connection, a bridge forming between two very different beings. He laughed softly, a sound of pure delight. "You're not so scary after all," he said. The dragons made low rumbling sounds, almost as if they were laughing too, in their own way. The boy realized that humor, just like stories, could touch creatures' hearts even when words alone might not. Hours passed, though the boy barely noticed. He told stories about friendship, about bravery, about facing fears without hurting others. He described the feeling of being small in a big world, and how courage often came from kindness rather than strength. The dragons responded in subtle ways, a shift of a wing, a flicker of glowing scales, a gentle hum. They were teaching him, too, in their own language of sound and movement. And the boy listened carefully, learning to understand them beyond words. At one point, the dragons moved in closer, forming a protective circle around him. Their wings spread slightly, creating a shimmering barrier that felt safe rather than threatening. The boy realized that he had never felt safer in his life. even though he was surrounded by creatures that could crush him in an instant. It was trust, he thought. He had earned a kind of trust that went beyond fear, beyond instinct. The boy paused to catch his breath. "Do you want to hear about the stars?" he asked quietly. The dragons tilted their heads, a gesture that seemed almost like agreement. He smiled, his heart swelling with joy. "Long ago," he began, "people thought the stars were just lights in the sky. But they are much more than that. They are worlds, each with their own stories, their own creatures, and their own wonders. And if you look closely, you can see that even the smallest star can shine brighter than the biggest darkness." The dragons hummed softly, their bodies shimmering with faint colors, as if they were absorbing every word, every emotion, every detail. The boy realized that stories weren't just entertaining. They were bridges. They connected beings who spoke different languages, who saw the world in different ways, who had never imagined they could understand each other as the day passed into night. The boy noticed the dragons growing calmer, almost protective. They were no longer just listeners, they were companions, silent but present, sharing this strange, magical moment. The boy felt a warmth in his chest, a deep sense of connection that he had never felt before. He understood something important. Courage was not about fighting. Courage was about being willing to share a part of yourself, even with those who seem impossible to reach. Finally, the boy yawned, stretching his arms toward the ceiling of the station. The dragons shifted slightly, creating a circle around him, their eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "It's time to rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, I'll tell you more stories. We'll explore more worlds, meet more creatures, and discover new adventures together." The dragons responded with low, soothing hums. The boy felt their presence like a gentle heartbeat around him. He lay down, closing his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. He was surrounded by beings that could have been enemies, but instead, they had become friends. Friends who listened, who understood, and who protected him in ways he could never have imagined. The boy's dreams were filled with stories and starlight. He imagined flying on the dragons' backs across galaxies, seeing worlds no human had ever seen. He dreamed of adventures filled with laughter, courage, and friendship. And the dragons, even in sleep, remained close, as if sharing the dreams with him. Guardians of both body and imagination. By morning, the boy awoke feeling renewed. The dragons were still there, patient and curious, waiting for the next story. He smiled, realizing that each story was not just a tale, it was a step closer to understanding. A way to build trust and a way to change the world. One word at a time. For the boy, the universe no longer felt lonely. The dragons had taught him that even the deadliest creatures could be reached with patience and kindness, and that stories had a power stronger than fear. And so, he prepared for another day, ready to continue this extraordinary friendship, knowing that their journey had only just begun. The boy woke to another quiet morning, the soft hum of the station, mingling with the faint vibrations of the dragons nearby. They were still hovering around, massive and glowing, but there was something different in their presence today. It wasn't just curiosity. They seemed almost eager, as if they had remembered the stories from the night before and were waiting for more, hungry not for food, but for the warmth of his words. The boy stretched, rubbing his eyes, and looked at the dragons. One of them, the smallest of the group, tilted its head and emitted a soft, musical hum. The boy smiled. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" The dragons made gentle sounds in response, almost like laughter. It was a strange feeling, to sense humor and understanding in creatures so alien. But the boy had learned that the universe was full of surprises, and some of the best ones came in forms he never imagined. He took a deep breath and sat down on the floor of the station. legs crossed as he always did before telling a story. Today, he decided he would try something new. Instead of just telling stories from Earth, he would try to listen too. He had noticed subtle patterns in the dragon's movements, the flicker of a scale, a shift of a wing, a ripple through their massive bodies, and he wondered if those were their own ways of speaking. "Can you tell me a story?" he asked quietly, looking at the largest dragon. Its eyes glimmered like molten gold, and for a moment the boy felt a shiver of excitement. It was strange, he thought, how fear and wonder could exist at the same time. The dragon responded with a soft rumble, almost a sigh, then emitted a gentle wave of glowing light that pulsed slowly across its scales. The boy watched carefully, trying to understand. He realized that the dragons were not just listening, they were sharing. Encouraged, he began to speak again, his voice calm and steady. Once, long ago, there was a creature who lived far away in a world no one had seen. This creature loved stories, and it believed that stories could change the world. One day, it met being so powerful that everyone else was afraid of them. But the creature didn't run. Instead, it listened. And in listening, it learned something amazing, that even the strongest creatures had feelings, dreams, and fears. As he spoke, the dragons leaned closer. One of the medium-sized dragons unfurled its wings slightly, letting the boy feel the gentle gust of air as it moved. He wasn't afraid. He had learned that they were not trying to harm him. They were curious, trying to understand this small human who had so much courage. He smiled faintly, imagining the dragons as enormous, living books, each one filled with stories waiting to be shared. The boy paused, letting the silence linger. He noticed how the dragon's eyes followed his every movement, how their scales shimmered in response to his tone of voice. He realized that storytelling was not just about words, it was about connection. The dragons were communicating in their own way, and he was beginning to understand them. Slowly, carefully, he reached out his hand. The smallest dragon lowered its head, letting him touch its glowing scales. It felt warm, almost like sunlight on metal. The boy laughed softly. "You're really beautiful," he said. The dragons responded with soft hums and gentle ripples across their bodies. It was as if they were happy, he had noticed. The boy realized something important. He was no longer alone in the universe. He had companions, creatures who could have been his enemies, but instead had become his friends. Friends who spoke in light and movement, who listened without judgment, and who shared their world with him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Encouraged, he began to tell a new kind of story, one that invited the dragons to participate. "Imagine a place far beyond the stars," he said, voice soft and melodic, "where mountains float in the sky, rivers glow with colors no one has names for, and creatures of every shape and size live together in harmony. There are no wars there, no fear, only curiosity, kindness, and friendship. And in that place, anyone can be brave, even if they are small." The dragons shifted slightly, and the boy noticed patterns in their movements. One of the larger dragons twirled gently in the air, creating a soft shimmer of light along its wings. Another tapped the floor with a claw, sending faint vibrations through the station. The boy realized that they were responding to his story, as if adding their own voice to it. He laughed quietly, thrilled by the idea that stories could be a conversation, not just a monologue. He continued, weaving tales of courage, empathy, and imagination. He described children who traveled through space not with weapons, but with wonder. Creatures who were feared, but turned out to be kind when approached with understanding. Worlds that seemed impossible, but became real in the heart of anyone brave enough to dream. The dragons listened, shifting, glowing, and moving in ways that seemed to punctuate his words. At one point, the boy leaned back and watched the largest dragon move closer, lowering its massive head to the floor, letting him place a small hand against its glowing scales. He marveled at the contrast, the softness beneath the scales, the gentle warmth radiating from a creature so enormous and powerful. "You trust me," he whispered. The dragon made a soft, vibrating sound, almost like agreement. The boy felt a thrill of joy and wonder. He had never imagined that trust could grow so quickly between beings so different. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The boy noticed that he was no longer just telling stories. He was listening too. The dragon's movements, hums, and glowing patterns were their own language, full of meaning. He began to understand them, interpreting their gestures as emotions, thoughts, even questions. One dragon arched its wings, forming a gentle barrier, and he understood it as a sign of care, not threat. Another twirled in a slow spiral, which he interpreted as playful delight. The boy realized that stories had become a bridge. They were not just words, but a way to connect across species, across worlds, across experiences no one else could share. He understood that every story he told was a thread linking him to these incredible creatures. A thread that grew stronger with every word, every laugh, every pause. As the day passed into night, the boy grew tired but happy. The dragons, too, seemed content, settling into a protective circle around him. He lay down on the floor, exhausted but at peace. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "I'll tell you even more stories. And I want to hear yours too." The dragons responded with soft hums, shimmering in gentle colors, as if agreeing to his words. The boy closed his eyes, letting sleep come slowly. In his dreams, he flew on the dragons' backs across glowing planets and sparkling star fields. He imagined vast oceans of color, forests that floated in the air, and creatures of unimaginable shapes and sizes. The dragons were there too, guiding him, sharing the experience, teaching him that courage was not just about facing danger, it was about understanding, listening, and connecting. He dreamed of telling more stories, of bridging gaps between worlds and creatures, and of discovering secrets of the universe hidden in places no human had ever seen. The dragons hummed softly around him in his dream, their presence reassuring, their energy alive and vibrant. The boy realized that he was not just a storyteller, he was part of a living story, one that was being written with each heartbeat, each word, and each gesture shared with the dragons. By the time the distant starlight signaled morning, the boy awoke feeling renewed. The dragons were still there, their massive bodies glowing softly, waiting for him to speak again. He smiled, ready to continue the conversation, ready to explore more of their world and share more of his own. He understood now that this was only the beginning, that stories could do more than entertain. They could connect, heal, and even tame the wildest creatures in the universe. The boy stood, feeling the weight of possibility pressing gently on him. The dragons shifted in anticipation, eager, curious, and full of life. He knew that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new stories, and new discoveries. And he was ready. Ready to continue the remarkable journey of friendship, courage, and imagination that had begun the night he first told his story. This day, like the one before it, would be filled with magic. Not the kind found in spells or potions, but the kind found in words, in trust, and in the extraordinary bond between a small human and dragons who had learned to listen. And the boy felt a quiet, deep joy, knowing that for the first time in his life, he truly belonged in the universe, not because of power or strength, but because of stories, courage, and the simple, incredible magic of understanding. The boy woke to a quiet hum that filled the station like a gentle song. The dragons were still there, hovering close, their massive bodies glowing softly. Today, something felt different. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore. He could sense a deeper connection. The dragons were trying to communicate in ways he didn't fully understand yet. But he could feel it in the vibration of their wings, the flicker of light across their scales, and the subtle movements of their enormous bodies. The boy stretched and rubbed his eyes. He smiled at the dragons, feeling a warm excitement in his chest. "Good morning," he said softly. The dragons responded with gentle hums, their eyes bright but calm. One of the smaller dragons twirled in the air, flicking a faint trail of light across the room. The boy's heart leapt. That movement wasn't random. It felt deliberate, almost like the dragon was saying, "Good morning to you too." He sat down on the floor, crossing his legs as usual, and took a deep breath. "Yesterday, I told you many stories," he said. "Today, I want to hear yours." The dragons froze for a moment, then began moving in ways that seemed almost playful. One of the larger dragons shifted its wings, creating a ripple of light across its body. Another tapped a claw on the floor, sending soft vibrations through the station. The boy watched carefully, realizing that these were not just movements, they were expressions, perhaps even stories of their own. He smiled, excitement bubbling inside him. "I think I can understand you," he whispered. "Your stories aren't words like mine. They are colors, movements, sounds, and feelings. I want to learn them." The dragons responded with a soft rumble that vibrated through the station like a heartbeat. It was gentle and rhythmic, comforting in a way he had never imagined. The boy began by mimicking the patterns he had seen. He lifted his hands slowly, tracing shapes in the air, moving in rhythm with the dragon's vibrations. At first, the dragons watched silently, but soon they began to respond, shifting their massive bodies to mirror his movements. One dragon arched its back and curved its tail in a flowing pattern, sending trails of glowing sparks across the walls. The boy laughed softly, thrilled. "Yes, that's a story," he said. For hours, they moved together, sharing a silent conversation. The boy learned to interpret the dragon's gestures. A flicker of scales could mean curiosity, a gentle flap of wings could mean joy, and a soft hum could mean comfort. He tried responding in kind, weaving his small movements into their patterns. Slowly, they were speaking to each other without words, sharing emotions and imagination through gestures and light. The boy realized something incredible. He was learning to listen in a completely new way. He wasn't just hearing stories. He was feeling them. The dragon's stories were about places he could not see, about experiences humans had never known. One dragon's movements told of a world filled with floating mountains and glowing oceans, where light and air danced together. Another's ripples told of storms that sang like music and skies that shimmered with colors no human had names for. He listened, completely captivated. Each story was different, yet each carried the same message: wonder, curiosity, and the joy of discovery. The boy felt his heart swell with amazement. He had never imagined that creatures so fearsome could have such depth, such richness of experience. And he realized something even more powerful. The dragons were not monsters. They were storytellers, just like him. Encouraged, the boy began to respond with his own stories, mixing words with movements, creating a dance of light and sound. He described Earth with its forests, rivers, and animals. He told tales of children playing under starlit skies, of mountains that reached the clouds, of oceans that sparkled in the sun. The dragons shifted their wings and tails in response, adding their own patterns, creating a tapestry of stories that merged human imagination with alien wonder. At one point, the boy lay down on the floor, tracing shapes in the air with his hands. The dragons leaned closer, their heads almost touching him, their massive eyes glowing warmly. He felt safe, more than he had ever felt. Despite their size and power, the dragons were gentle companions now, fully engaged in this shared experience. He laughed quietly, "You're amazing," he whispered. "I never knew stories could be like this." The dragons responded with soft, melodic hums, sending gentle pulses of warmth through the station. The boy realized that this was more than just communication. It was friendship. He had always loved stories because they connected him to people. But now he understood that stories could connect across worlds, across species, even across experiences that seemed impossible to share. Hours passed, but the boy didn't notice. Time seemed to stretch and bend around them, just as it often did when he was lost in a story. The dragon stories became more complex, more beautiful. One dragon's tail flicked in arcs that formed patterns resembling constellations. Another's wings created ripples of color that painted the walls like moving murals. The boy tried to match their movements, weaving his own gestures into their dance, creating a conversation that was alive and vibrant. He felt a deep sense of joy. For the first time in his life, he truly belonged. Not because of strength, not because of power, not because of where he came from, but because of imagination, understanding, and the willingness to connect. The dragons, once terrifying predators, had become his companions, his teachers, and his friends. As the distant starlight shifted, signaling the approach of another day, the boy paused. He lay on the floor, breathing deeply, and smiled at the dragons. "Thank you," he whispered, "for sharing your stories with me. I've learned so much." The dragons hummed softly in reply, a sound that felt like a warm embrace. The boy closed his eyes, letting sleep come slowly. In his dreams, he flew on the dragons' backs, soaring across glowing landscapes filled with floating islands, shimmering oceans, and skies painted with colors he could never name. He laughed and danced in the air with the dragons, sharing stories and learning new ones, a world where imagination and reality were intertwined. When he awoke, the dragons were still close, waiting. Their glowing eyes reflected soft curiosity and gentle care. The boy smiled, knowing that this bond was growing stronger every day. Stories had become more than entertainment. They were the language of trust, friendship, and understanding. He realized that tomorrow would bring even more adventures, more stories, and deeper connections. And he was ready to explore new worlds with the dragons, ready to listen to their stories, and ready to share his own. The universe no longer felt vast and lonely. It was full of possibility, magic, and friendship. The boy stood, stretching, and looked at the dragons with wonder. He knew this was only the beginning of an extraordinary journey, a journey where stories could change hearts, build bridges between worlds, and create bonds that even the fiercest of creatures could not break. And as he took a deep breath, ready for the day ahead, he felt a quiet joy that came from knowing he had discovered something truly rare, the power of understanding, imagination, and shared stories. In that moment, surrounded by dragons who had once seemed so dangerous, the boy understood something simple but profound. Courage is not always about facing danger with strength. Sometimes it is about reaching out with your heart, offering stories, and listening with care. And when you do, even the most fearsome creatures can become your friends. The boy smiled, ready for the next story, ready for the next adventure, and ready to continue this remarkable journey that had begun with a simple idea, that stories could connect worlds, hearts and minds, even across the vast, infinite universe. The boy woke to a calm, golden light spilling into the station. The dragons were still there, but something had changed. Their glowing eyes no longer carried just curiosity. They seemed gentle, protective, even almost proud. The boy felt a warmth in his chest, realizing that the bond he had built with stories and gestures had grown deeper than he ever imagined. They weren't just listening anymore. They were watching over him. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, smiling softly. "Good morning," he whispered. One of the largest dragons lowered its head, the tip of its glowing snout hovering near him without touching. The boy reached out and placed his hand gently against its scales. The dragon let out a low, vibrating hum that felt like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. The boy laughed quietly. "You trust me," he said, almost in awe. The dragon responded with another hum, soft and melodic, like an affirmation dot. He realized that their relationship had shifted. The dragons, who had once been dangerous predators, were now his companions. They had learned from him, and he had learned from them. He could see it in the way they moved slow, careful, and attentive. They no longer circled him like hunters. They stayed nearby, protective, almost like guardians. The boy's heart swelled with gratitude and excitement. He sat down and began to speak softly, telling a story about a small child who had learned the importance of understanding others. Once, he began, there was a being who could have faced danger with anger, with strength, or with fear. But instead, this being chose something different. He chose kindness, curiosity, and stories. And in doing so, he discovered that even the fiercest creatures could become friends. The dragons responded in ways the boy had never imagined. One of them lowered its massive body, curling around him like a protective shield. Another unfurled its wings, creating a shimmering barrier of light and movement. The boy realized that they were no longer just listening. They were acting on their understanding. They were protecting him, showing that their trust had grown into loyalty. Encouraged, the boy continued, telling stories of courage, empathy, and imagination. He described worlds beyond imagination planets, with oceans of light, forests that floated in the air, and creatures that changed shapes with their emotions. The dragons responded with patterns of glowing light, gentle movements, and soft hums. Each gesture was a story in itself, and the boy listened carefully, learning more about them with every moment. As hours passed, the dragon's protective instincts became even more obvious. Whenever the station shuddered or a tiny object fell, they moved instinctively, creating shields with their massive bodies or flaring wings to absorb any disturbance. The boy realized that their behavior had fully transformed. They were no longer the deadliest predators in the galaxy, at least not when it came to him. They were his guardians, willing to defend him without hesitation. The boy marveled at the change. He had never imagined that stories and kindness could have such power. Here, in the middle of the vast emptiness of space, he had turned fear into friendship, danger into safety, and isolation into connection. The dragons were living proof of the power of understanding, and he felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. He decided to take the story even further. "Let me show you more of my world," he said softly, pointing to the distant stars visible through the station's window. "There are worlds full of life, beauty, and wonder. Planets where creatures live peacefully together, where challenges are solved with courage and cooperation, not violence. I want you to see them too." The dragons tilted their heads, their glowing eyes following his gestures. One of them emitted a low hum, and the boy realized it was as if they were agreeing to follow him, to explore and understand together. His heart leapt. This was more than friendship. It was a partnership, a shared journey of discovery. The boy began describing planets he had studied through books and observation, using stories to bring them alive. He told of deserts that sparkled with crystals, oceans that glowed in the moonlight, and skies painted with colors unseen by human eyes. The dragons responded, moving in synchronized patterns, adding their own shapes and lights to the stories. The station became a living tapestry of imagination, a place where two worlds merged in wonder and trust. He noticed that the dragon's once threatening energy had shifted completely. Their power was still immense, but it was now tempered by understanding and empathy. They no longer radiated fear. They radiated protection and connection. The boy realized that he had not only transformed his relationship with them, but had also influenced their very nature. They had learned to trust, to care, and to respond to kindness with loyalty. The boy's excitement grew. "Tomorrow, we'll explore more," he whispered, imagining adventures beyond the station. "We'll visit new worlds, meet new beings, and share more stories." The dragons hummed in response, their glowing bodies shifting to form a protective circle around him. It was comforting, magical, and filled with a sense of promise. He lay down on the floor, exhausted but happy. The dragons settled around him, their massive forms curling protectively. He realized that he had found something extraordinary companions who had once been terrifying, but were now allies, friends, and protectors. For the first time in his life, he truly felt safe and understood Dot as he drifted into sleep. He dreamed of flying across galaxies on the dragons' backs, visiting glowing worlds, and discovering hidden wonders. He imagined sharing stories with other creatures, bridging gaps of fear and misunderstanding with words, movements, and light. The dragons were there too, moving gracefully, guiding him, protecting him, and sharing in the joy of exploration. The boy understood something profound in his dreams. Courage was not always about fighting or being strong. Sometimes it was about reaching out with kindness, understanding, and stories. And when you did, even the deadliest creatures could become your friends, your guardians, and your allies. When he awoke the next morning, the dragons were still close, their massive eyes glowing softly in greeting. The boy smiled, feeling a deep connection that words could not fully describe. The bond they shared was more than trust. It was mutual respect, understanding, and friendship. He realized that this experience was changing him too. He had learned patience, empathy, and the extraordinary power of imagination. He stood, stretching, and looked around the station. The dragons shifted, adjusting their positions to stay close, protective, and engaged. The boy felt a sense of pride and wonder. He had transformed fear into safety, danger into companionship, and isolation into connection. And he knew that the next steps of their journey would be even more incredible, filled with discovery, stories, and shared experiences. The boy smiled to himself. He knew the universe was vast and unpredictable, but with the dragons by his side, he felt ready to face anything. Their bond had grown stronger, their behavior transformed from deadly threat to protective guardianship, and he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. Together, they could explore worlds, share stories, and create connections that no one had ever imagined possible. He lay down again, feeling the warmth of the dragons around him. The station was quiet, peaceful, and full of a new kind of energy, a mixture of trust, love, and understanding. The boy knew that tomorrow they would continue to explore, learn, and share stories, building a friendship that would last a lifetime. And as he drifted off to sleep, he whispered to the dragons, "Thank you for trusting me, for protecting me, and for being my friends." The dragons responded with a gentle hum, a soft ripple of glowing light, and a feeling of connection that filled the boy's heart with joy. For the first time, he realized that the universe was not just a place of danger or mystery. It was a place of wonder, friendship, and endless possibility. He closed his eyes, dreaming of new worlds, new stories, and adventures yet to come. The dragons remained close, their presence comforting and protective. And the boy understood, more clearly than ever, that courage, kindness, and imagination were stronger than fear, and that friendship could transform even the deadliest of beings. The boy woke to a quiet, golden light spilling across the station once again. The dragons were still there, massive and glowing, their presence calm and protective. Over the days and nights that had passed, their bond had grown stronger than anything he could have imagined. He had transformed fear into friendship, danger into trust, and isolation into connection. And now, as he looked at the dragons surrounding him, He felt a sense of wonder and purpose that filled his entire being. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, smiling at the dragons. "Good morning," he whispered softly. One of the larger dragons lowered its head, glowing softly, letting him place a hand against its warm, shimmering scales. The boy felt a familiar rush of comfort and awe. "You've become my friends," he said quietly, "and I hope I'm yours too." The dragon responded with a gentle hum, vibrating through the floor and walls, as if acknowledging the bond that had grown between them. The boy realized that what had begun as simple curiosity and courage had grown into something extraordinary. These dragons, feared across the galaxies as the deadliest creatures alive, had become his companions. They followed him, listened to him, and even shared their own stories in patterns of light, movement, and sound. And he had learned to understand them, not as monsters, but as beings with depth, emotion, and intelligence. Today, he decided, would be a day of exploration. He looked out at the stars and imagined the worlds that lay beyond, waiting to be seen, understood, and shared. "We've learned so much about each other," he said softly, "but there's a whole universe out there, waiting for us. Do you want to see it with me?" The dragons responded immediately, moving closer, their bodies shimmering as if in agreement. Their wings flared slightly, creating arcs of glowing light in the station, and the boy laughed quietly. Thrilled he prepared for their journey, imagining the wonders they might see. He had always loved stories, but now he realized stories were not just words. They were adventures, connections, and bridges between worlds. He thought of planets with forests that floated in the air, oceans that glowed in the night, and skies that shimmered with colors no human had names for. He imagined flying above them on the dragons' backs, discovering new creatures, and learning about worlds that no human had ever seen. The dragons sensed his excitement. Their massive bodies moved in a coordinated rhythm, their glowing eyes fixed on him, and their wings flickered in patterns that seemed to pulse with anticipation. The boy felt a deep joy, realizing that the dragons had become not only his companions, but his partners in exploration and storytelling. Together, they could travel to places beyond imagination and share experiences that no one else could understand. Before leaving, he told them a story, as he always did. "Once," he began softly, "there was a small human who had no one to guide him, no one to teach him, and no one to trust. But this human had something extraordinary, a heart full of courage, imagination, and kindness. One day, he met creatures that everyone feared, and he chose not to fight, not to run, but to understand. And in doing so, he discovered that the universe was full of wonder, friendship, and stories waiting to be shared." The dragons responded with gentle hums and shimmering lights. One of the largest dragons arched its wings, sending a wave of glowing patterns across the room. The boy laughed softly, realizing that their language of light, sound, and movement was now as familiar to him as spoken words. They were speaking to each other, communicating, and sharing stories in a way no one else could. He climbed onto the back of the largest dragon, gripping carefully as it flexed its wings beneath him. The other dragons moved alongside, forming a protective formation. The station faded behind them, becoming just a small dot among countless stars. The boy's heart raced, not with fear, but with exhilaration. He was flying, not alone, but with companions who understood him, who trusted him, and who shared his sense of wonder. They traveled across star systems, visiting worlds he had only imagined. On one planet, they saw forests that glowed softly at night, the trees singing with the wind. On another, oceans shimmered like liquid light, filled with creatures that danced through the waves. The dragons moved with ease, guiding the boy safely through the skies, while he described everything he saw in stories, capturing the beauty and magic of each place. The boy realized something remarkable. Stories were not just about the past or imagination. they could create new worlds. By telling the dragons about Earth, about kindness, bravery, and curiosity, he had changed them. And now, by exploring these new worlds together, they were creating stories that would live in memory forever. The universe, once cold and vast, now felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. Hours turned into days, though the boy didn't notice the passage of time. Each moment was a story, a new adventure, a lesson in courage, trust, and understanding. The dragons taught him about their worlds, showing him patterns of light in the sky, rivers of molten crystal, and storms that sang like music. The boy listened carefully, weaving these experiences into his own stories, combining human imagination with alien wonder. Together, they created tales that no human or dragon had ever known. At one point, they stopped above a glowing canyon, its walls pulsing with colors that shifted like liquid light. The boy landed on a ledge, looking down at the incredible sight. The dragons settled around him, their massive eyes reflecting the vibrant glow. He felt a profound sense of awe. He had traveled far beyond the station, beyond the stars he had always watched. And yet the greatest discovery was not the beauty of the universe. It was the bond he shared with these incredible creatures. He sat quietly, letting the dragon's warmth surround him. "We've come so far," he whispered, "and we've learned so much. Not just about the universe, but about each other. You've taught me courage, loyalty, and wonder. And I hope I've taught you something too: kindness, imagination, and trust." The dragons responded with gentle hums, their bodies shifting to form a protective circle around him. The boy realized that their friendship was now legendary, even if no one else knew it. He had faced the deadliest dragons in the galaxy, not with weapons, but with stories, curiosity, and empathy. And in doing so, he had changed them. They had become his allies, his companions, and his protectors. The story of the boy and the dragons was no longer just his own. It was a story that would live in the hearts of those who might one day hear of it. As night fell on the glowing planet, the boy lay down, watching the stars above. The dragons settled around him, their massive forms curling protectively. He felt completely safe, completely at peace. The universe was no longer a lonely, dangerous place. It was filled with friendship, wonder, and endless possibilities. He closed his eyes, dreaming of future adventures. He imagined visiting new worlds, discovering new creatures, and sharing stories with beings who had never heard a human voice. The dragons hummed softly around him, their glowing bodies like a living, breathing blanket of warmth. And in that moment, the boy understood something profound. Courage was not about strength or fearlessness. It was about listening, understanding, and sharing your heart. When morning came, he awoke with a smile. The dragons were still there, their massive eyes glowing gently. Together, they would continue their journey, exploring new worlds and sharing stories. And the boy knew that this bond would last a lifetime, a legendary friendship born from courage, imagination, and the power of stories. The boy whispered softly, "Thank you for trusting me, for protecting me, and for being my friends." The dragons responded with a gentle chorus of hums, lights flickering in patterns that felt like a song. He realized that he had changed the dragons, but they had changed him too. Together, they had created something magical, of friendship that transcended species, worlds, and fears. And so, the boy, once small and alone in the vastness of space, became a storyteller, a friend of dragons, and a bridge between worlds. He had discovered that even the deadliest creatures could be tamed, not by force, but by patience, kindness, and stories. And as he looked out at the infinite universe, he knew that this was only the beginning. The adventures, the stories, and the bond with the dragons would continue forever. A legend of courage, friendship, and imagination that no one could ever forget. The stars twinkled silently above. The dragons rested around him, and the boy closed his eyes, dreaming of all the incredible stories yet to come. And in that quiet, magical moment, he knew that the universe was a place where anything was possible, as long as you had courage, curiosity, and a heart willing to connect.